Good morning everyone, and welcome to the Glenelg Hopkins CMA's second live broadcast for the Nature Festival. We are currently out at the Walker wetland and it is very windy out here. So this morning I'm going to apologise if we do have any wind coming into our video recording. We've got a few things in place to try and make sure it's not so bad. But it is a very, very windy spot out here. So this morning we're going to be taken around the Walker Swamp wetland area by Greg Kerr from the Glenelg Trust. And he's going to explain what they've done here and the plans for what's going on. So maybe in the background we can't quite see that the full moon is still up. But yes, it's a very windy day. It's very windy. It is not great for a live broadcast. So we're going to be doing our best to try and make it enjoyable for you watching at home. So while we say goodbye to the moon just over my shoulder there, before the sun comes up, I'm going to mask up. Greg won't be masking up this morning because he's talking to camera. So apologies in advance for any wind that comes through, but we're going to try and do our best to make sure that that isn't a big issue for you, and enjoy our walk this morning.
We're standing in an area that was very different 3-4 years ago. This is now a wetland that's filling to its natural levels, and we've been filling here with flows from the North Barnacle Drain for about 2 weeks now. Prior to that, the wetland was still full for the first time in many years. It's held water right through the summer period and the autumn, and that meant that we've had really good water bird numbers right across the region for this summer-autumn period, which is an excellent change. We're also starting to see a real change in the vegetation across the wetland, but the history of the area, going back to the first periods of settlers in the area in the 1830s, late 1830s, has seen a use of this site initially for grazing, and then with developments there was a drainage system put in to bring water into this area in the around the turn of the 20th century. We had a drain from the very large swamp that used to be over to the east of here called Heifer Swamp, and that drain was constructed in 1900, and it brought water into the floodplain here, and then subsequently in the 1930s a second drain which drains an area 30-40 kilometres up to the north. It brought water into the northern part of this site, and so this very large floodplain across here was made much wetter than it used to be, and then in the 1940s and onwards, more drains were built through these wetlands to take water out into the Wannon River, and so this area used to fill up with water initially, and then as the inflows slowed, the drains taking the water out would start to win, and so the wetlands would dry out. And so since that time we've had drier than usual wetlands across this whole area. And when I talk about the area, it's a very large area. It's about 13-14 square kilometres of wetlands across this part of the Wannon River floodplain. The Wannon River comes out of the Grampian up to the north between the Sarah and the Mount William range. It brings water down out of the Grampians and then historically would have flooded across this area quite regularly. But the flows in the Wannon River are much lower now than they were prior to the 1970s. A lot of the water is taken off now over the range and used for irrigation schemes up to the north of the Grampians. So those floods that once would have also filled this area have pretty much gone, and it's because of the drainage systems that come into the floodplain that we now get water coming into these wetlands.
Now, Greg, we're going to move a bit further down if we can. We have some audio with our wind, so if we wander down to our bird hide.
Yep. The formation of these wetlands is quite interesting. The river, the Wannon River flowing out of the Grampians, used to come out and pretty much head down to the south. And about 4 million years ago, there's a volcano just down to the south here that had lava flows that blocked off Wannon. And then a second volcano just next door to it, Sheep Wash Hill, it also had large lava flows about 2 million years ago. And between those sets of lava flows, the Wannon, as it used to be, historically was totally blocked. And a large basin across this area, just beside the Grampians, was formed. The Wannon flows into this basin, fills it up, and then overflows the sill. And the new Wannon River that formed at that time, because of the lava flows, it ran around the edge of the lava flows and follows the edge of the lava flows across to the west until it hits the Glenelg River and then heads out to Glenelg. So this area that was formed is like a delta, and the water has been flowing out for millions of years now from that delta. It's the eroded materials from the Grampian has formed a big alluvial fan right across the area here, and that alluvial fan means that as the Wannon comes down, as it gets to higher water levels, it starts to branch out. You get multiple branches of water coming across this area. The change that's happened in that time is that this area has slowly and steadily filled up with sediments. So probably about 40 metres of sediments that filled up through here, and that's across that 13 square kilometres. So there are quite a few wetlands that have formed across this area. There's initially the Gooseneck Swamp, which fills when the Wannon flows, and then down to the south of that is Brady Swamp. These are very large wetlands, and then across to the east of those two areas is the Walker Swamp complex. It's across this whole floodplain that all these drains were built. So with Glenelg Trust, working with CMA and local landholders, have over the last 6 years slowly and steadily worked to fill in the drains across the various wetlands. Initially, the drain between Gooseneck and Brady Swamp was filled, and then there's a large drain out of Brady Swamp that used to run parallel to the Wannon River, about 1 kilometre of drain that was then filled. And then we'll see in a minute, there's a large drain that used to come through Walker Swamp, and that was a temporary structure put on that. And then last year we finally put in a permanent structure and filled in all the drains across this area, about 26 kilometres of drains. So there's been a dramatic change in the flow path again over the last probably mostly about 4 years that has seen the wetlands start to go back to a natural cycle of wetting and drying.
Now, Greg, looking over your shoulder, the sun is just coming up, so we'll head upstairs where there's guaranteed to be no wind and watch it come up. So Greg, we've got a permanent structure here. Can you tell us a bit about what the Glenelg Trust has done in terms of some infrastructure for people to be able to come and see the bird life and what they might be able to see?
Yeah, well, the tower was initially given to us, donated to us as a platform from out on the Bellarine Peninsula near Geelong. A developer there used it to enable people to view the properties for sale, but it was surplus to needs, and so NGT was able to pay for its transport up here. And then through a federal grant and with the help of our volunteers, we were able to put a proper structure on the top and set it up to become a bird hide. And we've now got this marvellous permanent structure that's open to public at all times now, and you can come in and watch the bird populations change over a Walker Swamp. We've finally got the water filling up to the edge of what used to be the maximum level that it would fill to prior to us putting in the permanent structure to block the outlet drain last year.
So what will we see out here? If we pop the binoculars on, obviously we've got a mobile phone here, Greg, so we can't really zoom in too much. We can enjoy the view, but what would we find out here?
You've got the spike rush or Eleocharis growing up out of the wetland base. The wetland, you can see a few remnants of the old drains. If you look up to the north up there, you can see where we filled in the main drain that came in from the north. We've put that back to natural surface. That drain then turned left and used to flow out across towards the Grampians over there on the western side. That's all filled in now. You can also see, if you look across to the east here, a few remnant lines. After the sheep farming finished on this site in about 2003, the land was changed to blue gum, and there were blue gum plantations put right across the area, and the furrows and mounds that they put in to plant the blue gum in were put in right across the wetland, and that meant that the blue gums were raised a bit, and the hope was that they would grow, but the flooding was still significant enough to stop them growing in Walker Swamp proper. But all across the surrounding landscape, through the red gums that you can see over there, blue gums were planted. They were harvested initially in 2013, but only about half of them were harvested. The rest were not of sufficient quality. So we had, when we took over the land about 2 years ago, we had a large number of impacts on the landscape that we had to change. We had the mounding from the blue gums that went right across the wetlands and changed how the wetlands work. Meant that weeds were growing in along the mounds through the entire wetland structure. We had the drainage system that was running through it, and then we had remnant blue gums left across the slightly higher areas. So we've had to modify all of that. We've taken away the blue gums. We've used a laser bucket, a large machine that's with a very large tractor that has scraped off the tops of the mounds and filled them back in to flatten the whole landscape out again. That's had a really marvellous effect because the vegetation has come back very quickly. It didn't damage the vegetation, which has most of the root system underground, so that worked very nicely. We've taken away all of the blue gums. We've filled in the drains. We've had to then think about what level of water we wanted to achieve. So we did a hydrological study, and the modelling showed that we could actually fill the drain to a level where we could restore the wetland to its natural extent. And so what you can see at the moment is about half of what we'll actually achieve. With the flows that are coming in now, if we can get the rainfall that's predicted over the next month or two, for the first time we're likely to see that the wetland actually fill above the old level that it used to get to. If we can get enough water in here to raise it by about another 40 or 50 centimetres, we'll actually see the wetland extend right out through the tussocky garnia that you can see out on the right there. It'll fill that area. Around to our left, it'll fill out to the trees. We had to raise this road about 50 centimetres and put culverts under it, and then the water will flow under and it'll fill right down to the south there for about 2 kilometres. So we'll actually get a wetland back that's probably about twice the length of what it used to be, back to its natural size, and it'll fill up right to the edge of the red gum trees that you can see running along right up to the north. That's the old level that water used to reach to. So the wetland will become...
It'll become wet again. So there are some birds that are puddling around on the edge.
Yep.
What sort of birds would we find out here? What are your common birds?
The common ones, we get a large number of swans. We're seeing quite a few species of duck that are regularly here in large numbers. We get up to a couple of thousand ducks that would be feeding here at any one time. Grey teal, a lot of shell duck. We get chestnut teal, some black duck, and we're starting to get some of the diving ducks. The shovelers have been turning up regularly. We're getting a lot of hardheads. So as the water becomes more permanent and as start to come in and use this as a summer refuge and a drought refuge, we're starting to see a real increase in the diversity of ducks. We're getting a lot of waders now, which is interesting. We're starting to see sharp-tailed sandpipers, red-kneed dotterels. We're getting black-winged stilts, or white-necked stilts as they're calling them now, starting to turn up in large numbers quite regularly. And then we're getting lots of smaller numbers of less common birds. One of the ones that's quite exciting is we're starting to see sea eagles here regularly now, and perhaps one that we're really wanting to see a lot more of is the brolga. I don't know if you can see the brolgas over there. One was just unfurling its wings. We're getting brolgas here probably about 60 or 70% of the surveys that we do, and we're hoping that this year they may even start nesting. They're turning up very regularly, and yeah, we just haven't seen a nest yet.
So when would they normally nest?
About now.
About now.
Yeah. We did have a pair with a chick over in Brady Swamp last year. Brolgas move around a fair bit with their chicks, and we're not exactly sure where that nest was, but it could have been this wetland. There's another smaller wetland over on the edge of the Walker Swamp complex that they could have nested in as well.
So the Walker Swamp complex, Greg, is quite large. For those people who missed it at the start with the wind, this itself that we're looking at here, this is Walker Swamp?
This is Walker Swamp proper, but there's actually quite a few other wetlands that are on the land that NGT, Nature Glenelg Trust, now owns, which is a 4.5 square kilometre area. But in addition to that, this is really just a part of a greater floodplain, that 13 square kilometre area I talked about before. So these wetlands are separated by a long, low lunette, like a small dune that formed on the eastern side of wetlands through this region, probably from wave action, and that lunette separates this wetland from a set of wetlands over to the west, which the main one to start with is Gooseneck Swamp, which is a large complex swamp that the Wannon flows directly into, and then Gooseneck Swamp in turn connects to a very large swamp, probably about 3-4 square kilometres, called Brady Swamp, and that's a little bit down to the south.
So what's the master plan now? You've done a lot of work getting this back to almost its natural state. You've bought some land. Where do we go from here? What's the next plan, Greg?
The next plan really is, once the wetland starts filling by itself, the vegetation that's in the wetland will extend out. We expect to see zones of different vegetation types slowly appear. We've got the beginnings of them as you look down towards the edge there now. At the moment, a lot of the phalaris grass is dominating. The beauty of a wetland filling is that many of these introduced grasses and weeds simply disappear, and so as the water rises, it kills off a lot of the introduced grasses, and you can see where the water got to last year. This year, if things keep going as we're seeing, we'll fill right up above that, and all that phalaris will disappear. The vegetation that's presently in there, the spike rush that you can see dominating at the moment, it will probably push out further towards the edge, and we may well get some taller wetland plants like Typha and Phragmites starting to appear in the middle. But that will in turn provide more habitat for a different set of birds, some of the more cryptic species that we're not seeing much of at the moment. Those birds like the thicker, taller vegetation in the middle of the wetlands. From the terrestrial side, you can see where the water used to get up to at the edge of the red gums. As we get floodwaters up to that higher level, we'll probably start to see red gum seedlings start to come again, and we'll get a younger generation of red gums appearing. Behind that, there's a long, thin strip on the lunette of sand forest, and sand forest is a vegetation community that doesn't like to get wet at all. So it's been cleared in many parts. There's a bit here in the middle that is still reasonably healthy, and we hope to do a lot of work to re-veg areas either side along that lunette to try and restore some of the natural values there. We're going to have to work out how to deal with the very high kangaroo levels that we have right across this park, because at the moment what is keeping all of the native plants from recovering in these areas where we've removed the sheep is the very high numbers of kangaroos that are grazing across the area. And we're looking at trying to come up with areas where we can do some fencing to remove them and let the vegetation recover a little bit. But in the end, we also are looking at some innovative ideas to use things like Maremma dogs to bond them to a small group of sheep, possibly, that would live here, perhaps 20 or so, not enough to do any damage to the area, but enough to allow the Maremmas to stay in the area. And by their presence, we're hoping that the Maremmas, which create what we call in ecology a habitat of fear, an area where the kangaroos are less likely to come in and feed, or if they do come in and feed, just in smaller numbers for a shorter time. And in that context, it might be possible for this vegetation to recover. Alternatively, we're going to have to spend a lot of money on some very expensive fences.
And you did say you need to keep the vegetation down a little bit for the other species that are here, that letting the grasses grow wild might not be the best for some of the other animals.
No. And we do, outside of the wetland extent, we do need to make sure that we don't allow the grass just to become a thick mass that wouldn't enable a whole lot of other vegetation to grow anyway.
Okay, now that is almost our half an hour sunrise look at Walker Swamp done. I do have to apologise that we haven't been able to see a lot of the sunrise actually itself, but just for those who wanted to know why we were up in the tower this morning, we have some magic sunrise colours coming in the tower, but we have a bit of problem with the wind. So our sun is rising and it looks absolutely magic out here, but the wind, if you could hear it, is absolutely horrific. So thank you all very much for joining us this morning on our walk of Walker Swamp. We do apologise that it hasn't been able to have a walk outside. We kind of felt that it was more important that you got the information from Greg in an audible way, really, because the wind was really making it difficult down further. So this broadcast will be popped up onto our Facebook page and the Glenelg Hopkins CMA website as soon as we have some coffee in us, because it was a very early start getting out of Hamilton this morning. This event is part of the wider Victorian Nature Festival, which is all around Victoria, which has a lot of virtual events on it. If you go to vic.gov.au/our nature, you can see what else is on for the rest of the next week and a bit that festival is on. The Glenelg Hopkins has one more event on Sunday morning. We're going to be getting up nice and early again. It is the start of daylight saving on Sunday morning, and so at 11 o'clock, which is 10 o'clock old time, we will be out on the VVP grasslands. And for those of you who follow our Glenelg Hopkins Facebook page, you will know that we've been looking after the button wrinklewort plant. We're actually going to go and meet Button, the lonely button wrinklewort, and we're going to see some of the babies that the VVP team have bred in the last 12 months. So join us on Sunday morning, and thank you all for your patience with the audio this morning. The wonderful thing about working outside is that it's beautiful, but sometimes it's quite unreliable. So thank you all. Have a lovely day.